This question is just like a straightforward reading question. You have a short amount of text, just the first paragraph of this passage. 4 choices. There's not a lot of detail to the question, right? They just want the main purpose. So this is like pretty textbook of how an SAT question is supposed to look. Now, that's good for us because it means that we can really see one of our strategies at its best here because there's not a lot of other distractions or difficult things going on in the passage. And the strategy I want to use here is narrow your focus. And overall, the purpose of the no reading strategy is to avoid cluttering our brains with too much information. So what we're really doing a lot of the time is we are narrowing our focus to small words, small phrases, parts of the choices, so that the overall structure of the passage is easier to understand. So yes, I would read this before I go into the choices, but we're going to look at it in more detail. For the sake of time, I'm just going to jump right into the choices here. So the main purpose of the first paragraph is to introduce the passage's main character by showing his nightly habits. Okay, well, I can narrow my focus in this choice, look at specific phrases, and turn them into questions. And when I read the passage, I should be able to come out of that passage with an answer to that question. So his nightly habits. This is clearly like a phrase that means something. It's a strong phrase. It's got some meaning behind it. So I can turn it into a question, right? So introduce the passage's main character by showing his nightly habits. What are his nightly habits? If I cannot answer that question, then that can't really be a choice. That can't really be the right answer. So let's look at this. The Alcazar restaurant was on Sheridan Road, blah, blah, blah. They described the restaurant. It was long and narrow. The decoration was art moderne, whatever that means, blah, blah, blah. Here we get to the main character, Limey. He sat down at the second table from the cash register and ordered his dinner. The history book, which he propped up against the ketchup, had the glass sugar bowl, okay, blah, 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 blank pages, blah, blah, blah. He's talking about the book. There was some marginal notation, and unless someone had an upset of glass of water, the marks on page 177 were from tears. So we literally, all we know about this guy Limey is that he's at a restaurant. Now, does he go to this restaurant every night? Maybe. But that's never said in these lines. So I'm not allowed to say that that's a habit. I don't have proof of that. So as far as this question goes, what are his nightly habits? I have a clear answer. I don't know. I don't know what he does every night. I have one sentence telling me what he's doing this night, but that is not enough to say that I know his nightly habits. So narrowing our focus gives us a new question to ask as we look at the lines, and if we can't answer that question, that doesn't bode well for that choice. Let's continue with that same process. Choice B. Indicate the date the passage takes place by presenting period details. Well, there's a clear question here. If it indicates the date the passage takes place, then what is the date? I should be able to answer that question. If I cannot answer that question, no good. Now it says some things that maybe have some sort of kind of datedness to them. I don't know what this style is. Maybe that has something to do with a particular date, but it doesn't say what that date is, and I shouldn't have to know that myself. This is a SAT, not an architecture question, interior design, exam. Like, this is not about those things. I shouldn't need that knowledge. I guess it talks a little bit about dates in the book, but again, it doesn't say any of the dates, so I don't know when this takes place. Now, the blurb, which I intentionally left out here, does kind of tell about the publication date, but that's not the same thing, right? I mean, there are plenty of books that are published today that are about past periods. So even the publication date is not enough to know what is going on with that. So that's not enough. So again, what is the date that this is taking place? I don't know. Still a question mark. So that's not good for that choice. Choice C, convey the passage's setting by describing a place and an object. Well, I think that this choice gives us 2 questions. What is the place? And what is the object? Well, what is the place? The Alcazar restaurant on Sheridan Road near Devon Avenue. So, check. I can answer that question. What is the object? How about the history book, which gets, what is that? 20 lines, 10 lines, all about it. That's a lot. So that's enough for me to answer the question. Now, the fact that I can answer that so coherently and quickly is a good sign. Now, you might be thinking, well, what if they're talking about a different object? Well, it doesn't matter because you've already answered the question, and so we've already shown that they're talking about something, right? They also do talk about, there was a bowl, right, somewhere. There's ferns. The sugar bowl. So maybe it's the sugar bowl, but it doesn't matter. There's definitely objects that I can point to in these lines that are being discussed. And do they say anything else in this choice? Convey the passage's setting. Well, the setting is the restaurant, okay, by describing a place and an object. So all the questions that I can kind of pull out of this choice are answerable. And they're answerable fairly quickly and fairly confidently. So that's a really good sign for choice C. Now, we should really check D. We should make sure. So let's take a look. Foreshadow an event that is described in detail later in the passage. So this presents a problem, right? Because if we're using the no reading strategy, we have not read the rest of the passage. We're coming to this question first, most likely, and so we don't know what comes next. Here is where you need a little bit of faith, and I think most of the time it pans out. If this were referencing something later in the passage, if this were foreshadowing something, we would still have some sort of proof of that. So we could still ask a question, right? We could narrow our focus to the same thing. What is the event? Now, if I keep reading, keep answering all the other questions, and I find an answer to that question, then I might need to revisit these choices and rethink it. But right now, I don't have any evidence, right? I don't have any proof of this choice. And if there was some sort of foreshadowing, presumably that would be obvious. I know that sometimes in school when you read books or poems, there's a lot of this like literary stuff that's hard to know, right? Your teacher points it out for you and then you're like, oh yeah, the conch shell symbolizes, society, whatever. You learn it through someone else. But it's not really how an SAT works. Maybe an AP literature exam would work that way, but not really an SAT. So even if there were foreshadowing, it should be kind of obvious. So the fact that it's not doesn't bode well for this question. So I'm going to answer this the same way I answered the others before. I don't know what the event would be. And the fact that I don't know that, and I do know the answer to the questions from choice C, well, that tells me that choice C is much more likely to be right. And it is the answer here. So this is a really great example of the reading strategy because it shows how we take the focus away from the lines and shift it down to the choices. I might read this book or whatever and not have any idea what any of this stuff means, right? It might go in one ear and out the other because I'm not interested in the Alcazar restaurant. I don't know who Limey is. I don't care about books. I don't need a long description of what a book looks like. So there's lots of things that might not interest me about these lines. But the choices tell me things to be interested in, right? They give me new ideas to think about. And so by shifting my focus, narrowing my focus to the choices and the specific words in the choices, I give my brain things to care about as I read. And so I'm not just reading for the sake of absorbing a book, learning a story. I'm reading with purpose. I'm reading to see, are there nightly habits? Do they talk about a date? Is there an object? Is there a place? Do they foreshadow an event? And those questions are much easier to answer than the more basic question, what are these lines about? I'd rather answer specific, narrow questions as much as possible. And that's the reading strategy in a nutshell. It's changing the question so that you have an easier question to answer. And right here, I would be super confident in this because I was able to do that and turn them into very simple questions and find the answers very easily.